Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Here we are. It's 2016. Our President-elect Donald Trump has become clearly the President of the United States. But all of a sudden, the urging of the Green Party decided to step in and think, well, maybe we should do a ballot recount because we think that maybe perhaps it was too close of a margin that Hillary Clinton should have won the presidency. So it begins this big process where probably a lot of people don't understand what exactly the Electoral College is all about. Well, certainly our guest on the program today has that direct experience where in February of 2003, at the urging of friends as well as students of his popular Introduction to the Constitution class, decided to secure the Libertarian Party nomination. Traveling more than 25,000 miles, campaigning across the U.S. in the 15 months leading up to the party's national convention in Atlanta, he was clearly the underdog, but won the nomination after 3 closed ballots. He continued his underdog status in the national campaign despite appearing on the ballot in 48 states, more than Ralph Nader. As his candidacy was blacked out by the mainstream media, geez, do we know anything about what was going on, especially during this campaign? Frustrated by the bipartisan control of the electoral process, tried to serve process papers on Commission on Presidential Debates officials in a loss. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today somebody who's going to be giving us a clear idea of what the Electoral College is and whether or not this idea that we're going to be able to perhaps turn this presidency around and give it to somebody else will actually work. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, back here again, Michael Badnarik. Michael, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a wonderful introduction. I'd forgotten most of that stuff myself.
I can imagine you did. Campaigning's not easy, is it?
It is much more difficult than anybody might imagine.
Yeah, I know. We see that even with Hillary Clinton there, at times, falling off. It seems like, falling downstairs and so forth and so on. But, tell us, first of all, what happens when people campaign? It seems to me that Donald Trump had a clear idea of where to spend most of his time because those were the key states that he actually won that surprised, especially this so-called intelligent mainstream media.
Well, the process is due to the fact that each level of government is chosen by a different method. The Founding Fathers were very clear that, they want to mix it up a little bit and make sure that, not every political office was selected by the popular vote. And therefore we have the House of Representatives selected by popular vote in their district. The Senate was originally chosen by the state legislature. The state legislature was there to select people who would go to Washington and actively prevent the expansion of the federal government so that there would be a clear distinction between federal authority and state authority. Unfortunately, that's been changed by the 17th Amendment. But Supreme Court judges are nominated by the President and they are confirmed by the Senate. And the President of the United States was chosen by a derivative of the popular vote. And that was basically the Electoral College.
Now, let's talk about what the Electoral College is, because there are people I even talk with during and after this process here that really don't seem to understand what it is. They actually believe the popular vote should be the one that, should decide who should be stepping into this particular position.
Well, regardless of what you think should be happening now, the way to understand the Electoral College is to recognize that there was no Internet back in 1789. We didn't even have telegraph. I imagine it might have been invented, but it wasn't in wide use. And so, given the limitation on transportation during the day, it was impossible for a presidential candidate to host a nationwide campaign. And it was equally difficult or impossible for the people to even know who was running for office. And this is how the Electoral College came about. Basically, each state would have a certain number of people in Congress, a certain number of representatives and 2 senators. And so each state was allowed to select an equivalent number of people so that those people could be given a vacation. We would pay for their transportation to Washington. And the idea was that, you go to Washington, D.C., find out who is running for president, vote for the person you think is the best person, and then come back and tell us who you voted for. And so it was actually a very clever solution to a technical problem where at the time the country was just too big to, have any reasonable chance of collecting what would be a popular vote.
Now, what's interesting about the Electoral College, I'm sure if people aren't familiar with it, is they would take a look at, for instance, these key states and wonder, how come these particular states seem to have greater influence or numbers than other states?
Well, most of the states have a process, not all, but most of the states have a process where after the popular vote in November, we determine which political party had the greatest number of votes. And then all of the electoral votes for that particular state are then dedicated to the president. So I think it was back in 2004, Texas had 32 representatives in Congress and 2 senators for a total of 34. And so George Bush didn't bother to campaign in Texas because Texas is a blood red state. I mean, the chances of the Democrats winning the popular vote in Texas is basically slim and none. And there's no reason to waste money campaigning in a state where you've already got it wrapped up. When I ran for president in 2004, I didn't waste a lot of time in Indiana begging my mother for her vote.
Come on, Mom, it's me.
yeah. Mom was the one vote that I was, fairly certain about. And so, I didn't waste a whole lot of campaign money going to Indiana to try to convince my mom because I knew that she was already on my side. And so candidates will do the same thing. They're not going to waste money going to a state which is clearly in their category. So California and New York are absolutely Democratic states. They're terribly blue. Wyoming and Texas, those states are undoubtedly red. And so Democrats are not likely to campaign in California and New York because they pretty much have it sewed up. If the Republicans are going to campaign, they're going to campaign in the areas where they're trying to change somebody's mind. So if we get people to change from, what we expect them to do and vote differently in the election, then we'll spend some campaign money there.
Now, it's interesting. I'm sure it must have been interesting in class for you to be talking about the process we were experiencing this year. Tell us what that must have been like.
You mean running for president myself?
No, I'm talking about like this year, 2016, this whole election process here. What that must have been like for you, because I live in Portland, Oregon, and somehow we managed to make news, especially after the election, with, of course, the protest that was going on then, and eventually, you always get the idiots in there. They start deciding, well, we're going to start breaking glass windows out of buildings and beating up on cars and other people over this whole thing. And it left a lot, I guess, people just kind of scratching their heads like, what are these, I guess they want to kind of point the fingers at the millennials, if you will, but it was this younger generation. I mean, I was looking, and for instance, on your social media, I'm thinking, I think these people actually got most of their information from social media because they didn't seem not only very adept, but very deep about their knowledge of what was really going on here.
Well, that's true. Whenever I give presentations to a large audience, I will frequently ask people to raise their hand if they are good, patriotic Americans. And no surprise, everybody in the audience, it's a unanimous vote that everybody considers themselves to be patriotic. And then I say, okay, raise your hand if you can tell me how many articles are in the Constitution. And suddenly, nobody has a hand up.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, if, I mean, just hypothetically, if the government was doing something unconstitutional, how would you know? If you've never read the Constitution and you don't understand the principles that are embodied there, then you really wouldn't know. And so it irritates me that people, start to talk. They have strongly held opinions. Unfortunately, they don't know much about, they don't have much background in the subjects they're complaining about.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like? I mean, to be able to talk about that in class and this whole process here, what was that like?
Well, I tried to avoid this year's election. I was so disgusted with the whole process that I'd actually forgotten that Election Day was the following day. I was calling a friend of mine to find out if he was interested to, go out and party a little bit. He said, well, I can't do that. Tomorrow's Election Day. I went, oh, yeah, I guess it is. So I literally avoided the whole process completely. And mostly because it's just gotten so outrageous. People don't know what they're talking about. The fact that, many people in California were threatening to leave the country if Donald Trump got elected. Well, now that he's been elected, I guess there's a Cal exit movement. The people in California have decided that, well, they don't want to leave they do want to leave the country, but they want to take California with them.
Right. Of course, they want to bring the United States with them is what they want to do.
So, I'm glad that people are finally getting interested in politics, but they don't really understand much of the philosophy behind it, which is really sad.
Now, before we touch on that, it's interesting because my wife was showing me on YouTube. There was an interesting video that was posted about this election. Now, here's what's interesting. It's about a guy that had a temporary visa to come into the United States. He likes doing movie reviews on YouTube, and he decided to go ahead and just basically, as an outsider from outside the country's view, basically share his insights on how he's seen this whole thing. And it was really quite interesting because just like probably myself and a lot of other people, we were puzzled by the outcome, by the way people were reacting, mostly the young. And this is a guy that's probably in his mid-20s, give or take. He's also a Muslim. And he was looking at this and he goes, this is some of the most ridiculous things that I could see. And he says, I don't understand what's going on here and what they're up in arms about. And was talking about how great the country was and so forth. And I think, again, clearly as he was showing some examples of what he was talking about, they would show things like, these people in the streets, pro-Hillary. But then, for instance, the newscaster would ask a question, well, what do you think about these possible indictments about her emails involving Benghazi and so forth and so on? some relatively serious things here. And the person says, well, I really don't care. And I thought to myself, okay, there's somebody that's really not looking into anything. It's like the sheep just following the whole herd. They really don't care if there's any facts, whatever it is. They're just going to go ahead and follow that. And I'm thinking, what are these people thinking? As you said, this is a process that very few people really understand, especially in the political process. Kind of give us an idea what they should kind of have a better idea about.
Well, I wish that people would read Frederick Bastiat's The Law. Frederick Bastiat was an economist and a philosopher, came to the United States in the early 1800s and looked at the United States as it was shortly after things got started. And he went, oh my gosh, they've kind of invented heaven on earth. Everything is so wonderful. And he wrote an explanation of what a legitimate government looks like. I mean, there are a lot of different governments, but, I doubt that any of your listeners would endorse the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler. I mean, that's law. It was a government, but I don't think that philosophically anybody would have supported that, especially not now. And so, you have to decide what a government is supposed to be doing in the first place. And that's what Frederick Bastiat's The Law does. If there is no law of the jungle, for example, you and I are each responsible for our own survival. You got to find your own food, build your own shelter, and protect whatever property you can accumulate. Well, that's fairly primitive and a lot, very time-consuming. And so we, as a people, get together and invent a coordinated system to protect our life, liberty, and property. That's why we have police officers. Police officers are supposed to be there to protect you from the bullies that, you may not be big enough to protect yourself against. And so, we've subcontracted our survival to people who are a little bit better at it. Well, unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where we have abdicated responsibility for our own survival, and we just assume that the government is going to give us stuff, that the police are going to protect us, and that everything eventually will be okay. So it's our laziness that has created apathy towards the situation, and it's only now when the government is causing problems for everybody that people are starting to get a little bit uncomfortable.
Now, we, for instance, have this Green Party person deciding, I'm going to go ahead and raise money for doing recounts, especially in those key states. Pennsylvania basically said, well, we're not going to allow that here. It's done. That's the way it is. And it was funny because I think it was my wife that was saying, well, Pennsylvania decided, the Green Party person, I can't remember what her name is, was saying, well, I guess I'm going to go ahead and withdraw from Pennsylvania. And I said, well, no, it's not so easy because I just got through reading Pennsylvania says they're just not interested. It's just not going to happen. So what is the likelihood, and here's a process that's been around for quite a long time that seems to have worked pretty well until now. So all of a sudden we've decided until now this is, a process that's fine, but it just didn't work this time. We think we should go ahead and have a recount because we don't think the outcome was the way it should have been. What are your thoughts about something like that?
Well, that is not a new phenomenon by any stretch. In 2004, I would debate David Cobb of the Green Party. I disagree with David, politically, but David was a good man. He and I are still friends. We don't talk very often, but, I don't consider him an enemy. And he and I would debate each other in order to acquire media attention. Well, long story short, um, the election results in Ohio were blatantly off. David had several people who voted for him in the precincts, and those precincts reported 0 votes for David Cobb. And, David went so far as to get 25 people who would sign an affidavit swearing that they had voted for him. And the issue is, okay, we're not going to change the outcome of the vote, but, if there were 25 votes for David Cobb and those votes never showed up anywhere, there's fraud going on. There's a difference between voter fraud and election fraud. Voter fraud is where I go in and I manage to vote 3 or 4 times. That's fraud on my part as an individual. Election fraud is a little bit more serious, where the people who are controlling the outcome manipulate the machines to give a different outcome than might have been reported. And so in Ohio, David Cobb and I, suspected election fraud, and we demanded a recount, and 2 county clerks and I believe the Secretary of State in Ohio spent time in jail for election fraud. So, tampering with the votes goes all the way back to, electing Julius Caesar. So, it's not a surprise that it happens. It's a surprise that it's taken this long for people to complain about it.
Now, it's interesting because people would say with the Internet that it might be a better way to go, but what are your thoughts about using the Internet, when it comes to select the president, as far as the popular vote is concerned?
We certainly could. One of the most common questions I get about the Electoral College is, isn't that obsolete? Shouldn't we? And then, they give some kind of an example. The Internet is certainly capable of collecting all the votes. And, we do it for Dancing with the Stars and American Idol and all these other television shows. There's no reason that we couldn't put together a system that would collect the votes in each state, and the results of those votes were then transferred to Washington for a final count. I have a problem with that, is that anything that's electronic can be erased, and you have no way to verify the votes. Some people say, well, we have to get the results in a hurry. And I'm not in so much of a hurry. I would rather have an accurate total than a total in a hurry. So, yeah, we could use a popular vote in the Internet, but I think that the bigger problem is the fact that people don't read the Constitution. They have no idea what the Constitution says. I started my Constitution class so many years ago because people would come up to me and say, well, the Department of Education is in the Constitution. I go, no, it's not. Oh, well, Social Security is in the Constitution. No, it's really not. And I would demand that they show me, okay, here's a copy of the Constitution. Show me the Department of Education. Show me, Social Security. And they would look and look and look and look, and it's like, oh my God, I thought it was there. Well, if you don't read the Constitution, you don't understand the principles there, you're never going to be able to, defend your freedom. And so I think it's much more important for people to start to study the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Bastiat's the Law, the Federalist Papers. There was a judge with a really interesting name His name was Learned Hand. And he said that most people think that anything they like is constitutional and anything they don't like is unconstitutional. He says it doesn't work that way.
You know, and you're so right about that, because that seems to be seeing what we've seen in this whole thing, especially in 2016.
No, absolutely. Everybody, freedom of speech, and then somebody, they just recently had somebody come to one of the universities in Texas, and the speaker was, I mean, I hate to use the term white supremacist, but is certainly racist to, some extent. And the students at the university were protesting, we shouldn't let this guy talk. It's like, why not? I mean, I don't say that I agree with him. I mean, I think the guy is an idiot. But, you can't suppress somebody else's speech because you don't like it, because that gives the government the excuse to suppress your speech, because sure as hell somebody's not going to like what you have to say. And so the proper response is not to prevent somebody else from speaking. The proper response is to set up your soapbox right next door and explain why the person you don't like is so out to lunch. You have to attack the philosophy, not the person. And I saw an interesting sign recently that said, if you lose the argument, don't talk louder, make your argument stronger.
Now, what is the likelihood that this election can be turned around based on this recount effort?
Well, no, the recount effort is not intended to turn the election around. I think the woman's name is Jill Stein, and she's said openly that she's not trying to change the outcome. She's trying to demonstrate widespread election fraud. That, the election basically was not the outcome that people might have thought, that there was tampering with the results. And so all they have to do is create doubt in the minds of the voters, and that would be sufficient at the moment. But the other thing, so what happens, and again, most people don't know this, in the spring of a presidential election year, the state Republican Party will get together and they will select potential electors for the Electoral College. The Democrats will get together in their little, conclave, and they will, pick out the top Democrats. These are people who may or may not become part of the Electoral College. So then we wait patiently or impatiently for the popular vote in November, and when more than 50% of the people in Texas vote Republican, which we are fairly confident they're going to do, then the 100% of the electors are supposed to vote for the Republican candidate, in this case, Donald Trump. However, it turns out that not all electors are legally bound to do that. We send them to Washington. They will actually vote. The 534 members of the Electoral College will actually vote for president, the one that counts, in January, I believe, just about 2 weeks before the inauguration. Now, granted that if you send Republicans to Washington, they are most likely to vote for the Republican candidate. However, there have been rumors that there's been a big push to motivate the electors to switch their vote from the one that everyone expects them to make, so that, Republican electors could theoretically vote for Hillary Clinton. So at this point in time, there is, people are waiting with bated breath to see if, the electors are going to be willing to vote their conscience rather than party.
Well, it's certainly interesting stuff. A lot of fireworks going on here. Now, I was curious, is there a website people can discover more about you and your work?
Of course, my website is constitutionpreservation.org. Not constitutional, but just constitutionpreservation.org. And I offer an 8-hour class on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. My phone number is there. Just give me a call or send me an email, and I'd be happy to arrange a trip to your particular city. I just need to have minimum number of students so that I'm, making a profit whenever I travel. I can't fly just to teach, 2 students. But other than that limitation, I am, eager to travel and more than happy to help wherever I can.
Always fascinating stuff having you on the program today, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the Beyond 50 community, as well as upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.